We opened today's R&L show speaking of the proxy war that the U.S. and its NATO military bloc is waging against Russia. An unjust war on both sides between imperialist rivals. When this war was launched over a year ago, few outside of Bob Avakian and this show were calling this a proxy war. Much of the progressive and decent people were being pumped up and manipulated to rally behind Ukraine by Biden and the Democratic Party.
Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. Never.
A president and a party that are nothing if not imperialist war criminals for their actions over their entire history, as well as by the media and shills like Sean Penn.
They need more ammunition, more long-range precision weapons, and yes, fighter jets. What we are waiting for seems to still be attached to this overcautious concern related to nuclear weapons.
Overcautious concern related to nuclear weapons.
And there were some small factions of idiotic so-called leftists who, along with the hardcore fascists around Trump, who supported Russia's unjust imperialist invasion of Ukraine. Today, this war has step by step escalated with more and more high-tech weapons and intelligence from the U.S. NATO war bloc flowing into Ukraine, such that today it is widely recognized that the blatant and scarcely hidden fact is that this is a proxy war, utilizing Ukrainian soldiers and people as cannon fodder to advance U.S. imperialist interests.
The United States isn't pushing back on the rhetoric. The Russians are going, hey, the U.S. is fighting a proxy war against us. I think the answer is yes, we are.
Just in the last few days, not only have Russian missiles rained down on the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, along with vital infrastructure around the country destroyed, but drones have attacked buildings in Moscow, the capital of Russia. The U.S. and Ukraine each say, we didn't do it, but destruction reaching the capital of Russia is not a minor problem for an imperial power and leader such as Putin and Russia. Escalation speeds up with hundreds of thousands of Russian troops thrown at Ukraine, while the U.S. and NATO supply high-tech tanks and F-16 fighter jets.
U.S. officials said 31 Abrams tanks would arrive in Germany at the end of May, and hundreds of Ukrainian troops will be taught how to operate and repair them.
US and G7 allies agreed to send F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine.
This has been a long-standing request of the Ukrainians, and it's followed a similar pattern to what we've seen with other requests for advanced weapons, that first the allies say no, and then they say maybe, and then they finally get to yes.
Both Putin and Biden have, like rattlesnakes, rattled their nuclear fangs, with Putin saying, quote,
«И при угрозе территориальной целостности нашей страны, для защиты России и нашего народа, мы, безусловно, используем все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства». Это не блеф.
And his defense chief, Dmitry Medvedev, made this clear, quote, nuclear powers have never lost major conflicts on which their fate depends, end quote. A month later, Biden said, quote, if in fact things continue down the path they are going, end quote, in Ukraine, the world faces, quote, the prospect of Armageddon, with his defense secretary declaring that the U.S. strategic objective in this war was to weaken Russia.
We want to see Russia weakened.
These imperialist rival gangsters are literally holding the fate of humanity hostage to their dog-eat-dog, expand-or-die imperialist system. And then along comes Timothy Snyder, Yale history professor whose expertise is expounding on Hannah Arendt's bankrupt theory of totalitarianism, which is an incoherent and empty attack on communism. Snyder's is a career in defense of bourgeois democracy. He parlayed this to popularity critiquing Trump's fascism, and now he is all over the liberal media shilling for the U.S. proxy war against Russia.
We should do our very best to try to make this war in Ukraine end as quickly as possible, which means, to be clear, the Ukrainians winning it as quickly as possible.
On May 14th, he wrote an article in the New York Times that is stunning in its subservience to U.S. imperialism, with its logic of America as a force for good. Bob Avakian has written a response titled, "Don't worry about a nuclear war. If there is one, Russia will lose. The dangerous demagoguery of Timothy Snyder on behalf of U.S. imperialism and its proxy war in Ukraine." This title says a lot. It's almost unbelievable that this learned professor could actually make the argument that Snyder does. And while I am strongly recommending that you all read Bob Avakian's sharp polemic on our website, revcom.us, and therefore I don't want to recap it here, I will read how Bob Avakian begins. Quote, he says, Snyder did not directly say, don't worry about nuclear war. If there is one, Russia will lose. But he might as well have said that. The actual title of his article is Putin is fighting and losing his last war. And this article is a shameless apology for U.S. imperialism overall and specifically in its proxy war against Russia in Ukraine, end quote. Later, Bob Avakian goes on to write this, quote, listen to this logic from Snyder. If Russia detonated a nuclear weapon, it would lose that jealously guarded treasure of superpower status. Really? That is all or the most essential thing that would happen if Russia used nuclear weapons? Here, Snyder is truly blinded by his American supremacist arrogance, and he seems set on obscuring reality for the rest of us, end quote. And after this, BA goes into the even more demagogic and dangerous logic from Snyder. But to find out about that, you need to read it yourself. But what we are going to do is show you a short clip from the interview that Sansara and I did with Bob Avakian last fall, where he nails the danger and the stand that people here need to wake up to and to take up. We've played this before, and in my opinion, this clip needs to be seen and taken to heart by millions of people. And when you go to revcom.us to read BA's piece, The Dangerous Demagoguery of Timothy Snyder, dig further into more than 100 sharp polemics and analyses that Bob Avakian has written in the last 2 years. These provide tremendous guidance and direction for how to understand the madness we face and the danger humanity faces and the way out. A radically different way to think, to act, and to become part of overthrowing this monster that is driving the world to the brink of destruction. The great danger and shock that the Ukraine war has put before the world, and the potential for far greater shocks, can shake people, giving rise to profound questioning. These jolts could also give rise to even sharper divides than exist now in the ruling class, opening the potential for millions to break free from the system that is careening to all-out war, opening up the possibility of real revolution. And we're going to follow this clip from Bob Avakian and the interview that we did with him with a segment that we did last year on the RNL show, just a month after the Ukraine war began, that brings home the danger that those who rule this system are putting humanity in.
And all this ridiculous stuff, people sticking their heads down or, I stay in my own lane. You think if there's a nuclear war, it won't touch your lane? I mean, come on, let's get fucking serious around here. You think if U.S. and China go to war, your lane is going to be somehow, I'm just going along in my lane. I mean, people need to wake up and get serious. This is a contest between oppressors, the world's leading oppressors, with the U.S. #1. Yes, USA #1 oppressor and plunderer in the entire world for decades. And, it's up to us to oppose our own ruling class. Yes, we also oppose Russian imperialism. Yes, we also oppose Chinese imperialism. But we're not living in Russia. And we're not living in China. And if we were living in Russia and China, our primary focus would be on opposing our ruling class where we were. We live in the United States. All these crimes committed by these imperialists are done in our name. Supposedly, the army goes out there to protect our freedoms and blah, blah, blah. They go out there to plunder people so that U.S. imperialism can suck the blood of literally billions of people. And if you think I'm exaggerating, go on the website, revcom.us, and read the articles by Raymond Latta, which get into the parasitism of U.S. imperialism, how it is an international exploiter and super exploiter of people in the global south or the third world, the poorer countries of the world, and what this has to do with what the U.S. looks like internally and how it thrives. Even the consumer goods that people have are cheapened, more affordable to the massive population here because of the way that people are viciously exploited. More than 150 million children in the third world who have no childhood. Hundreds of millions of women, like those in Bangladesh working in factories, making the stuff that goes to Walmart or whatever. You know, people all over the world in similar situations. It is our responsibility to oppose this primarily, while we also oppose these other imperialists. This is where we live. This is being done, and all these massive crimes, and now the threat of existential threat of nuclear war. A threat to that's what existential means, threat to the existence of humanity. All that's being done in our name. And idiots like, Steve Van Sant aside, now I'm giving him a break by saying idiocy. We have a responsibility to first and foremost oppose our own imperialist ruling class and what it's doing. And more generally, I've made a statement and I'll make it again. The masses of people in the world, and this is very acutely and urgently posed now, the masses of people in the world cannot any longer afford. It was always terrible that these are the people ruling the world, but it's now acutely posed. We can no longer afford to allow these imperialists to dominate the world and to determine the destiny of humanity. They need to be overthrown as quickly as possible.
On August 6, 1945, a blazing, million-degree fireball suddenly appeared just above the Japanese city of Hiroshima, instantly killing, burning alive, or vaporizing tens of thousands. Firestorms engulfed the city. Shockwaves and winds over 1,000 miles an hour came next, shattering bodies and buildings, hurling men, women, and children through the air. Nearly all structures were destroyed over a mile from ground zero. There were red, burned, and bloated dead bodies piled up high. The corpses with the guts and the eyes popped out. Clouds of dust turned the morning into twilight. And later, black rain fell. This is from American Crime Case number 97, August 6th and 9th, 1945, the nuclear incineration of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You can find this at the website revcom.us. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped the first atomic nuclear weapon on the city of Hiroshima. 70 to 80,000 people, around 30% of the population of Hiroshima at the time, were killed by the blast and the resultant firestorm. Almost 70% of the structures were destroyed. Almost all of the vegetation was wiped out. But 170 ginkgo trees survived. This small tree comes from one of those 170 trees. The seeds of Hiroshima's ginkgos have been sent to cities and towns around the world. This young tree is growing in a botanical garden I often visit on the campus of UCLA. This tree represents, as a friend has said, the worst of humanity as well as the best of humanity's aspirations. The dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima by the United States followed 3 days later by the dropping of a second atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Nagasaki are unconscionable actions that were not militarily necessary to win the Second World War, but were designed to intimidate the whole world, especially the then socialist Soviet Union, the first revolutionary socialist country, delivering an atomic terrorist message that the U.S. intended to reign supreme over the whole world. Dropping this weapon of mass destruction on a civilian city that had no military value was consistent with the whole history of the United States, founded in slavery and the genocide of the native people and the theft of their land, and then the expansion of the U.S. imperialist empire through the bloody wars of conquest from the end of the 19th century down to today. In the Handbook for Revolution Basics from the Talks and Writings of Bob Avakian, Chapter 1, quote number 6 says this in part, quote, imperialism means war, war to put down the resistance and rebellion of the oppressed, war between rival imperialist states. It means the leaders of these states can condemn humanity to unbelievable devastation, perhaps even total annihilation, with the push of a button, end quote. This is the worst of humanity imprisoned in the exploitation, oppression, rivalry, and wars of the system of capitalism-imperialism. But my friend also said that this lone ginkgo tree, spread with others around the world to be living witness and reminder of the war crime of Hiroshima, also represents the best of humanity in the promise and potential of cooperation and preservation of life on Earth. The stark yet liberating reality, the truth, is that for that potential to be realized requires nothing less than a real revolution to overthrow this monstrous imperialist system and birth a radically different and far better world guided by the new communism as developed by the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian, B.A.